The women characters have never gotten that much attention. There are three main characters who, in the original story, some of them get a good deal of attention, but one in particular, Joseph's wife, doesn't get any. And I thought that there would be a terrific opportunity to imagine a young woman who was his equal in every way, with intelligence, and equaled his beauty and equaled his openness of mind. And so that was a wonderful, joyful chapter for me to write. And then there's another character who is one of the bravest women in the Bible, whom I gave a little bit more flesh and blood to, who figures in the story about Joseph's brother Judah, and her name is Tamar. And then there's also the wife of Potiphar, who's one of the courtiers of the Pharaoh, and she has gotten a very bad rap over the centuries from various rabbis and priests and ministers, because she's always portrayed as the evil woman who tries to seduce Joseph. But you mentioned innocence. Everybody's innocent if you go deeply enough into their lives and look at the thoughts that they're believing that cause them to be harmful to themselves and to others. And so I was able to imagine her tremendously painful falling in love with Joseph. And there's not a chance that he can succumb to her seduction, because he holds integrity as close to his heart as his love for God, and he
Hmm.
would never possibly betray his master. So she's constantly disappointed and thrown into despair by his refusals. And I've gone into that cycle of hope and desperation and traced it so that the reader can understand why she would do such a horrible thing as accuse him of rape when there was nothing like that that happened. So it's a way of taking her out of the black and white world of good and evil of the theologians and showing her as a fallible character whom we can all relate to. And that makes the story that much the more beautiful and convincing, I think.
I have to tell you, I'm so grateful that you mentioned about the description of Joseph's wife. I don't remember the exact chapter, but I remember reading it, and as it just seeped into me, just your description and your words, you felt true partnership and a true brotherhood and sisterhood of these two beings that, are completely in love with each other and recognize each other's gifts and honoring of that. And yet also their beautiful differences and how that mirrored to the other. It was just gorgeous, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. And of course, I wasn't imagining this out of whole cloth. I have a bit of experience with kids.
Do you ever?
You may have
I,
suspected.
I love your lady, Stephen. I love Katie.
Well, that makes two of us.
I know. At the end of your book, you noted that truth washes over Joseph. True forgiveness is the realization that there's nothing to forgive. What did that mean to him and for us?
Well, it's a kind of humility, realizing that when you're forgiving, you're not a magnanimous I giving something to undeserving you, that there's a process that happens if your understanding is broad and wide enough, that the experience of forgiveness happens by itself without even your conscious effort. And that
Mm.
when you understand that the person you've ostensibly forgiven couldn't have helped doing what he or she did or said, because he or she was believing the thoughts that occurred at that moment, that's how you see their innocence. And it takes all of the effort and the doership out of the process and leaves you simply as somebody with the awe of seeing innocence everywhere,
Mm.
in the whole world of human action, that there's not a single person, however guilty in one sense they may be, seeing that that translates into innocence in a far deeper sense. And some people, when they hear this kind of thing, are outraged, because it seems that this is a way of letting somebody who did something horrible off the hook. And it's not that at all. If you go deeper into it, there's no punishment or blame involved. And this is something that you really can't grasp unless you've had the experience to some extent. So people who are interested in having the experience, I would recommend that they go to Katie's website, thework.com, and fill in a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet about somebody that they haven't forgiven yet, and see if that gives them any further experience of what it might feel like to live in a world of total innocence.
Mm. It's really beautiful and so true, Stephen. And you've mentioned about experience. I think what was so unique about this book as well is it was experiential, and it's experiential just the sheer human experience alone. And if we're human, we've all been hurt at times, but we've also all hurt in our own unconsciousness, and how you just describe the innocence of all of us and just the benevolent nature underneath can be so missed in this path of life. And you portrayed it in a way that was just so profound and potent and real. And I think that was just the transcendence and the transformative aspect of reading this book.
Yeah, and now, now that I think of it, it's not only Potiphar's wife, that woman who's so in torment because of her lust for Joseph, who's portrayed in the black and white moral categories of rabbis and priests and ministers for ages, for millennia, but it's the brothers too. It's the whole world of Joseph. They're portrayed as the enemies, who
Mm.
unredeemable and who are by Joseph's grace forgiven at the end. But if you see people that way, you can't appreciate what good reason they had at the beginning for wanting to murder this arrogant young man. And I think I've given readers the experience of that as well. So until you see Joseph from the terribly offended and hurt point of view of his brothers, you can't really see who he is and what he has to overcome as an ego at the beginning of the book. So the whole world becomes not black and white, but not gray either, but all sorts of multicolored refinements of the moral perspective. And it's a much richer world than the moral world that we've been given by conventional religion.
Indeed, it is, and it was reading that. That was certainly the reality, page by page. And I felt what was so beautiful too is, as human beings, we all innocently can resist to go, whether you call it the dark night of the soul or into the pit. And you led the reader into the pit, and there was just such a rawness and a ripeness in Joseph's own stripping and in that humility of being there and being, it was almost dissolving of the old, so there could be a birth of the new. It was gorgeous. I'm curious, is there anything else just from your perspective that you'd want us to know about the book or about Joseph or about true forgiveness?
Well, I think we've covered it pretty in some detail, some depth, and I'm very grateful to you for those questions that you asked. Just maybe to repeat the title, Joseph in the Way of Forgiveness, and it's St. Martin's Press, and it's available